My name is Elena Rojas. I just turned 20. My younger brother, Mateo, 2 years younger than me, is the golden child, the center of all hopes in the family. I put my dream aside, becoming the financial pillar of my parents, but they gathered all their assets to send my younger brother to study abroad, leaving me in a noisy factory. In utter despair, not accepting my fate, I decided to make them regret their cruel decision. The sun beat down relentlessly on the corrugated tin roof of the processing plant, the heat radiating inwards, mingling with the sticky sweetness of peaches and the metallic tang of the machinery. My hands moved automatically, sorting, slicing, pitting a rhythm beaten into muscle memory over countless hours. Sweat trickled down my temples, stinging my eyes. I blinked it away, my gaze momentarily drifting towards the window, imagining Mateo bent over his books, the furrow of concentration on his brow that Mom always praised. A sigh escaped me, quiet, lost in the factory noise. It wasn't resentment, not yet. It was a dull ache, a phantom limb reminding me of the life I'd packed away. The university acceptance letter hidden deep in a box under my bed. It was a sacrifice made willingly, I told myself, for the family, for Mateo. Later that evening, the small kitchen felt crowded, thick with the aroma of simmering stew and unspoken expectations. Dad was recounting Mateo's latest academic success, his voice swelling with pride. He has a real gift, that boy, he declared, beaming at Mateo, who flushed slightly but soaked it in. Mom nodded vigorously, ladling soup into bowls. He's our hope, Elena, she said, turning to me, her expression earnest, almost pleading. You understand, don't you? You're the strong one, the older sister. You have to help him succeed. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face feeling stiff. Of course, Mom, I understand. But the soup suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. My gaze flickered towards Mateo. He was engrossed in his meal, seemingly oblivious, his youthful face untroubled by the weight his future placed on my shoulders. Did he see the calluses on my hands? Did he notice the permanent fatigue etched under my eyes? Or was I just part of the background, the reliable engine humming away to power his journey? Sometimes, a flicker of guilt would cross his face when our eyes met, a brief acknowledgement before he looked away, perhaps unsure what to say, or perhaps simply swept up in the current of expectation carrying him forward. It was easier, I supposed, not to look too closely. The air in the living room crackled a few weeks later. It wasn't anger, but a heavy, charged silence that pressed down on us. Mom and Dad sat side by side on the worn sofa, their faces a mixture of excitement and solemnity. Mateo fidgeted in his chair, unable to contain his anticipation. I stood by the doorway, leaning against the frame, a knot tightening in my stomach. We've made a decision, Dad announced, his voice attempting a formal tone. We've gathered everything we can, borrowed a little from Uncle Carlos. He paused, taking a deep breath. Mateo, son, you're going to study abroad. Engineering, in Germany. The words hit me like a physical blow. Abroad, Germany. The sheer scale of it, the cost implied, stole the air from my lungs. I saw my meager savings, painstakingly accumulated, vanish in an instant. I saw yours stretching ahead, filled with the relentless rhythm of the factory, the scent of peaches becoming the permanent perfume of my existence. It's the best chance, Mom added quickly, her eyes scanning my face, perhaps searching for a crack in my composure. An investment in the future. For all of us. Mateo finally exploded with joy, jumping up to hug Mom, then Dad. Thank you, I won't let you down. His face was alight, oblivious to the sudden chill that had enveloped me. He turned to me, his eyes shining. Elena, can you believe it? I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach turning into a cold stone. It's wonderful news, Mateo. My voice sounded distant, hollow even to my own ears. I forced my lips into the shape of a smile, but I knew my eyes betrayed me. They felt flat, empty. He hesitated, perhaps sensing the dissonance. Thank you, Elena, for everything. I couldn't meet his gaze. I turned away, busying myself with clearing the non-existent dust from a nearby shelf. You should focus on packing, I murmured, changing the subject. The silence that followed was profound, heavier than any argument could have been. It was the sound of my future being signed away, notarized by my own complicity. The months that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of work and exhaustion. Every spare peso I earned was bundled and sent home, earmarked for Mateo's tuition, his rent, his books, his life in a world away. My own existence shrank. Meals became simpler, smaller. New clothes were an unthinkable luxury. The small apartment I rented closer to the factory felt less like a home and more like a holding cell where I rested between shifts. My already lean frame grew leaner. The shadows under my eyes deepened. Phone calls home became fraught rituals. "Hello, Mom," I'd begin, hoping for a scrap of news about something other than finances. But inevitably, the conversation would circle back. "Mateo needs a bit extra this month, Elena, for supplies, or the exchange rate wasn't favorable. Daughter, we're a little short." Their voices were filled with anxiety, yes, but rarely with concern for me. Was I eating properly? Was I well? The questions seldom came. I was the provider, the means to an end. Loneliness became a constant companion. The factory offered camaraderie of a sort, shared grievances about the foreman or the long hours, but no real connection. My old school friends were moving on, some marrying, others finding slightly better jobs in the city. My life felt stalled, trapped in service to a dream that wasn't mine. One particularly brutal week, a fever took hold. My body ached, alternating between chills and sweats. Calling in sick meant losing a day's pay, money desperately needed for the next transfer. I dragged myself to the factory, fueled by cheap aspirin and sheer willpower, hiding my shivering beneath my work apron. The thought of telling my parents, of adding another worry to their plate, of potentially disrupting the flow of funds to Mateo, was unbearable. So I suffered in silence, the physical misery compounding the emotional weight. It felt like a foreshadowing. My own needs, my own vulnerabilities, had become invisible, irrelevant. The resentment, once a small seed, began to sprout, pushing tentative roots into the compacted soil of my resignation. It was still tangled with love, with duty, but it was undeniably there, growing quietly in the dark. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors. It arrived quietly, insidious, disguised as a casual request relayed by my mother during our weekly call. "Mateo needs money for a new laptop, Elena," she said, her voice tinged with the usual blend of expectation and worry. "His old one is giving him trouble, and he needs it for his advanced courses." Normally, I would have just sighed, calculated the extra shifts required, and agreed. But this call came on the heels of a particularly degrading encounter with the factory foreman over a minuscule error, followed by the discovery that my already meager rent was increasing. I was standing in my tiny kitchen, clutching the phone, the smell of cheap instant noodles clinging to the air. I pictured Mateo, not struggling with faulty equipment, but perhaps wanting the latest model, the one his new friends had. Maybe I was being unfair, but the image lodged itself in my mind. Then Mom added, almost as an afterthought, "It's such a blessing we have your contributions, daughter. Without your hard work, Mateo wouldn't be able to manage all these expenses. We are counting on you." Something inside me didn't just crack, it shifted, like tectonic plates grinding into a new, colder alignment. It wasn't just her anymore. It was a clear, sharp anger, followed by a chilling sense of clarity. Blessing, contribution, it was my lifeblood, drained month after month, and the casual assumption that I would simply provide, regardless of my own circumstances, it felt like a profound disrespect, a dismissal of my entire being. That week, when I sent the money home, I held back a small amount, $50. It felt simultaneously like a betrayal and a reclamation. My hands trembled slightly as I tucked the bills into an old biscuit tin hidden under a loose floorboard in my closet. It wasn't much, barely enough for a few decent meals, but it was mine. It was the first conscious act of defiance, a quiet whisper of protest in the face of years of silent sacrifice. The guilt gnawed at me, but beneath it, a fragile seedling of determination began to push through. Escape came unexpectedly during a rare afternoon off. Seeking refuge from the heat in the dusty quiet of the town's small public library, I stumbled upon an old financial newspaper left behind on a table. Idly flipping through it, my eyes caught on an article about the stock market. It spoke of shares, dividends, growth concepts utterly alien to my world of piece rates and paychecks. Intrigued, I sought out more information, using the library's slow, sputtering internet connection during my lunch breaks. At first, it was pure curiosity, a mental puzzle far removed from the mind-numbing repetition of the factory. The numbers, the graphs, the strategies, they represented a different kind of work, one that required intellect, analysis, foresight. The things I thought I'd forfeited forever. Slowly, hesitantly, curiosity morphed into genuine interest. This knowledge felt powerful, illicit almost. It was something completely separate from my family, from their expectations, from the life they envisioned for me. It was mine. The path was far from easy. Financial literacy was in part of my upbringing. I devoured library books, deciphered online tutorials meant for people with far more capital and education than I possessed. Fear was a constant companion, fear of losing the precious little I managed to skim, fear of discovery. I operated in absolute secrecy. I dealt only in cash, using intermediaries I found through hushed conversations with slightly savvier coworkers who dabbled in small-time currency exchanges, taking convoluted routes to make tiny, anonymous investments through barely regulated online platforms accessed via public terminals. I lied about my expenses, claiming rising costs for food or transport to explain the slightly smaller sums I sent home. My parents noticed. "Are things tight there, Elena?" Dad asked once, his voice laced with concern. I suspected, more for Mateo's allowance than for my well-being. "Everything is fine, Dad," I lied, my heart pounding. "Just being careful." Mateo called sometimes, full of stories about his university life, occasionally mentioning his own financial pressures, needing new software, wanting to join a student trip. Each call was a strange mix of guilt and reinforced resolve. His world seemed so expansive, while mine had shrunk to the factory, my tiny room, and the secret glow of the library computer screen. His unintentional complaints only solidified my need for something of my own. There were setbacks. A small investment soured, wiping out weeks of painstakingly saved cash. Doubt crashed over me. Was I fooling myself? Was this just another dead end, a pathetic fantasy? I almost gave up, the weight of responsibility and the fear of failure pressing down. But the memory of my mother's casual words, the image of my own invisible sacrifices, fueled a stubbornness I hadn't known I possessed. I scaled back, studied harder, became more cautious, more analytical. Then, one day, it happened. A calculated risk, based on weeks of research into a local agricultural tech company, paid off. It wasn't a fortune, but the profit was significant, more than I earned in 2 months at the factory. I stared at the numbers on the flickering library screen, disbelief warring with a rising tide of elation. I logged off quickly, hands shaking, and walked out into the sunlight, blinking. The world looked different, sharper, brighter. It wasn't just about the money. It was the validation. I had done this. Me, Elena Rojas, the factory worker, the dutiful daughter. I had used my mind, my determination, and created value out of almost nothing. A profound shift occurred within me. The resentment didn't vanish entirely, but it lost its sharp, painful edge. It transformed into fuel, motivation to build a life defined by my own choices, not by imposed obligations. I continued sending money home, diligently, reliably. But now, it felt different. It was a choice, made from a position of slowly growing strength, not a requirement levied upon my weakness. My secret stash in the biscuit tin grew, no longer just a symbol of protest, but the foundation of a future only I could see. The question wasn't if I would reveal my secret, but when and on whose terms. The quiet turning point had passed. I was now navigating a new, uncharted path, guided by a flickering screen and a newfound sense of self-worth. The crisis arrived, as crises often do, suddenly and without mercy. It came via a frantic phone call from my mother, her voice tight with panic. "Elena, daughter, it's Dad. He collapsed at work. They think it's his heart. He needs surgery soon. The costs, Elena. We don't know what to do." Behind her, I could hear Dad's weak protests and Mateo's anxious voice trying to soothe them both. Mateo had graduated by then, armed with his German engineering degree, but the job market back home was tough. He'd found work, but it was entry-level, barely enough to cover his own expenses, let alone a medical emergency of this magnitude. The old dynamic snapped back into place with terrifying speed. All eyes, all hope, all pressure turned towards me. The unspoken assumption hung heavy in the strained silence. Elena will handle it. Elena will provide. But the Elena on this end of the line was not the same girl who had numbly accepted her fate years ago. As I listened to my mother's choked words, a strange calm settled over me. The fear was there, certainly fear for my father's health, but the old, crushing weight of obligation, the familiar resignation, was gone. In its place was a clear-headed assessment of the situation, the deliberation of someone who had learned to manage risk, to weigh options, to act decisively. This was the test. Everything I had secretly built, every sacrifice, every calculated risk, had led to this moment. "Mom, take a deep breath," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "Tell me exactly what the doctor said. What is the estimated cost?" I listened patiently, absorbing the details, the figures. The amount was substantial, enough to wipe out a significant portion of my hidden savings, the fund I'd mentally earmarked for starting a small import-export business. My own ticket out of the factory for good. The old Elena would have liquidated everything without a second thought, perhaps even taken out loans, plunging herself back into a cycle of debt and servitude. But I didn't offer that. "Okay," I said finally. "I can help." Relief flooded my mother's voice, thick and wet. "Oh, Elena, thank God. I knew we could count on you. I will transfer enough to cover the immediate surgery costs and the initial hospital stay," I continued, my tone firm but gentle. "We can manage the rest, the follow-up care, together, as a family." "Mateo," I addressed him directly, knowing he was listening, "you'll need to figure out how you can contribute too, now that you're working." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then, my mother's voice, hesitant, confused. "But Eleanor, the full amount, shouldn't you?" The unspoken question hung in the air. "Shouldn't you just give us everything, like always?" "Mom," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I can cover the critical part right now. Dad's health is the priority, but I also have my own life here, my own commitments, my own savings." I paused, letting the implications sink in. "I've been managing my finances carefully, making some investments. It's not an endless supply." It wasn't a boast, nor a detailed confession. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered quietly, but with unshakable conviction. It was the controlled reveal, just enough to redraw the lines, to establish that I was no longer simply their emergency fund. The reaction was mixed. I could sense my mother's initial flicker of disapproval, the ingrained habit of reliance warring with the immediate need. My father, blessedly, seemed too weak to argue, but it was Mateo's voice that surprised me. "She's right, Mom," he said, his tone subdued, carrying a note I hadn't heard before: respect, perhaps even remorse. "Elena has done more than enough. I will find a way to cover my share. We'll manage the rest." I transferred the promised funds immediately. It was a significant sum, a painful dent in my hard-won independence. But it felt different this time. It was a choice, an act of love offered from a position of strength, not extracted from a position of weakness. It came with boundaries, implicitly understood. A few years passed. The surgery was successful, and Dad recovered, albeit needing to take life at a slower pace. The family crisis, navigated differently this time, seemed to have subtly reset our dynamics. I didn't become fabulously wealthy overnight. My investments continued, sometimes growing, sometimes dipping, but steadily building a foundation. More importantly, they gave me choices. I finally left the fruit processing plant, the scent of peaches fading from my permanent memory. Using my savings and a small business loan secured by my investment portfolio, I started a small online boutique, importing handcrafted textiles from Andean communities. It was demanding work, long hours, but it was mine. My small apartment, once a mere resting place, now felt like a sanctuary, filled with color, texture, and the quiet hum of my laptop connecting me to customers and suppliers. My relationship with my family found a new equilibrium. I visited home regularly, bringing gifts, sharing meals. The old undercurrents of expectation were largely gone, replaced by a quiet, palpable respect. My parents, though perhaps never fully understanding the intricacies of my financial independence, saw the tangible results. My confidence, my stability, my ability to help them now not out of obligation, but out of genuine care on my own terms. They seemed quieter, more thoughtful, occasionally expressing a vague, lingering guilt about the past, which I gently deflected. There was no need for apologies. The changed present spoke for itself. Mateo, humbled perhaps by his own struggles to gain financial footing and by the stark reality of the medical crisis, treated me differently too. The easy entitlement of his youth was gone, replaced by genuine gratitude and a newfound appreciation for the sacrifices I'd made, sacrifices we never explicitly discussed, but which lingered in the unspoken understanding between us. He was finding his way, contributing to the household, finally shouldering his share of the responsibility. One crisp autumn evening, I sat in my cozy living room, surrounded by samples of brightly colored alpaca wool, reviewing online orders. My phone rang. It was Mateo. "Hello, Elena," he began. No immediate request, no hint of expectation. "Just calling to see how you are. How's the business going?" We talked for a while about his job, about Dad's checkup, about my latest shipment of textiles. It was a normal conversation, easy, balanced, the kind siblings should have. As I hung up, a slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of triumph or vindication. It was a smile of peace. I had found my way, not by breaking away entirely, but by reshaping the connections, by asserting my own value until others had no choice but to see it too. Looking back, the path was harder than I ever imagined, paved with silent tears and secret anxieties. But the struggle taught me that true worth isn't granted by others. It's built from within. Respect isn't freely given when you allow yourself to be endlessly depleted. It's earned when you define your own boundaries and stand by them, even with the people you love most. Independence doesn't mean isolation, but the freedom to choose how, when, and on what terms you engage with the world and with your family. Finding that balance, reclaiming my own life while still honoring the bonds of love, that was the hardest and most valuable investment I ever made. How do you find today's story? Leave a comment below. If you like this video, please like and share. Especially don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our interesting and exciting stories.